Welcome to Planet Marzipan podcast,
your Fish and Marillion podcast,
where we talk about all things in the planet of Marillion and fish. I'm Mezza, and here's my mate,
Craig Houston.
Hello and welcome to Planet Marzipan. I'm Mezza. I'm here with my good friend
Craig.
And we have a Planet Marzipan Meets episode. This week we have Planet Marzipan Meets Diz Minnitt and Pride of Passion, and as an added bonus, Mark McCormack. So at the moment we have Mark, Diz and Deborah on the call, and fashionably late, Nigel the guitarist is just coming into the call now.
Perfect time.
There he is.
There he is.
That's impeccable timing, sir.
That's brilliant. Hey. Couldn't have done it better.
Apparently, you're renowned for your punctuality, Nigel.
That's a vicious rumour.
Yes. But thanks for coming on, guys. We've tried to arrange this date a few times, and coordinating diaries has proved a bit of a challenge. But it's really great to see you all, and great to hear some new music from you as well, which we will come on to shortly. But we are a Marillion and Fish podcast, and we've got to ask Diz certain questions, get all this out of the way, but it's of interest to us and our listeners. I'm going to start with the audition tape, Diz, which I think, did you unearth that recently and pass a copy on to Mark?
Yeah, well, actually, it was a really interesting one because Mark, I don't know whether Mark's gone into the kind of the history of how he ended up connecting with us, but I think it was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, through the Scots Porridge group, I think, originally, which Brian was a member of, and Brian sent me a message saying, "Oh, you should link with this guy. You know, they're really interested in this stuff, and they're not, you know, kind of." Just people who sort of want to be linked to they're actually doing some really good stuff. So I linked into that. And it was when I got sort of chatting with Mark and started going through and finding sort of some of the old stuff that I got and sort of sharing it gradually, progressively from there. And we were having a kind of conversation around this, around the audition tape. And with these messages going back and forth. And I just thought, you know what, I think I've got a blooming copy of it somewhere. So I'd sort of said to Mark, I think it's got this, and this on it. And I thought, no, do you know what, I'm going to go and see if I can hunt it out. And lo and behold, I managed to locate it. So I was able then to share copies of the actual tape itself. And I think, and you can, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, I think I pretty much got all the songs that were on it from memory.
Almost.
Almost, yeah. So you know, it was really useful. Sort of like that audition tape. You know, it's the recorded in Ettrick Bridge in Hawkshaw, which is where we were staying. This kind of empty holiday cottage pretty much up on the moors outside Ettrick Bridge, with you know, being snowed in and cocooned by the dark, and recording that for Marillion just by covering up one side of an ordinary stereo cassette recorder and Fish singing into one side and having tracks played on the other, or the things like, you know, the original. I can't remember. Did we include the web on that? I can't remember if we did or not. I think we did. Yeah, we did a version of the web on there.
Yeah.
An original version of, again, a different music version of Garden Party, if you can call it kind of music with a solo bass and vocals. And I think a bit of Crystal Epitaph as well from memory.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, just a case of giving them whatever we could sort of give them to sort of go, here you go. This is what we want to do. But I think the whole thing very much came about from that original conversation with Mick Pointer when I phoned up from the kind of phone box in Ettrick Bridge while Fish was sort of sitting in the pub drowning his sorrows because we couldn't actually you know, get musicians to move to the Scottish borders. And from memory, I think I only had 1 10 pence And so the biggest challenge was convincing Mick to call me back in that original phone call, you know, and me doing the, oh yeah, I'm a, you know, bass playing vocal, you know, I'm a bass player and I can sing, but I've got a mate who's much better at being a frontman. And what you really want is somebody who can, you know, do all that frontman bit and capture the audience and do all those bits.
Yeah, because the band originally advertised for a bassist who could sing, didn't they?
Yeah, it was, the advert was for a bass bass player who could also do vocals. So that was the advert I kind of phoned up. No, you know, I can't sing, so it was a kind of a wing and a prayer at the beginning. So if they'd got me down on my own, it would have been a complete, you know, dead loss. But I was just determined that we could talk them into it and do what we did.
And was Marillion the only band that you got in touch with? So
yeah,
the tape was designed just for that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It was. I think they'd sent us up the recording of Close and Lady Fantasy, which is what they sent to us. And then I think we sent that down at about the same, or they kind of crossed in the post, but it was same sort of, all done at the same sort of time. And then of course we moved down on the I think it's the 2nd of January or 1st of January 1981. And I think they thought, you know, we were coming down to audition. As far as we were concerned, we shoved everything in the van and we were moving down, you know.
Yeah, you're moving down no matter what.
Exactly. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, you get a court order to get us out at some point, but we've moved in now, you know.
What is right, didn't it?
But yeah, I think it was I think we just had that kind of belief that we would be able to make it work, you know. It was that sort of sense of we're going to sort of come down. We'd like to do this, and yeah, it's going to be fab, inverted commas.
Where did because it's a kind of, the early stuff is really a mix of sort of the punk ethic and the prog ethic, isn't it? Really, it's got that sort of punky edge. The early track.
Well, I think the punky bit definitely sort of comes from me, and in fact, actually, the whole thing about me starting to play, because I sort of first started to play and formed a band at exactly the same time. So, you know, I was sort of formed a band having not played bass ever, and sort of, well, started off with a kind of doing a thing where I was messing about on keyboards, but it was actually a mate who was a guitarist, who was a big Hendrix fan, and his dad was a vicar. So we used to go and do these things in the local church where I'd mess around the church organ. He'd be playing heavily overdriven guitar, and another mate would be sort of singing stuff over the top of it, you know, very very avant-garde. And we decided from that we were going to form a band. So the guy that was singing went and bought drums, and I went and bought a bass and a bass stack, and then we sort of initially formed this band. But as I say, literally out of having never played at all, and someone told me that I'd be really competent after a couple of months, so I managed to sort of stick with it through that initial period, because you know, I'd picked up various instruments prior to that and got bored very quickly and put them down again.
Yeah, and that was that the band Plastic Surgeon? Was that the punk band?
Yeah. So it was kind of, even though it wasn't kind of, it was more sort of new wave than punk, but very sort of Joy Division elements, kind of elements of other sort of stuff. But my, you know, favourite bands had always been Floyd, Crimson, Gabriel, less so sort of Genesis. I got into Genesis probably as a result of joining Marillion rather than the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very much about that. But a lot of it was about the vibe. So yes, it might be kind of quite punky, but you're trying to get that vibe, that sort of essence of doing stuff, which is why by the time it sort of moved on to the Stone Dome band type era, which is one that Fish joined, it was, you know, it was very much, yeah, you were kind of creating these sort of, well, not quite soundscapes, but it was the sort of the feel of it. So the musicianship wasn't particularly brilliant, but you could get a certain vibe going.
Yeah. Well, that was the punk ethic, wasn't it? Anybody could be in a punk band.
Yeah.
You weren't really required to have any musical prowess.
No. But it was
that attitude, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But then if you think about it, you go back to early Floyd, you know, before they really started learning to play their instruments, their kind of, a lot of the musicianship was not quite rudimentary, but they were being more experimental than they were necessarily being really competent musicians. They became incredibly competent musicians as they went along.
Yeah.
But it's that same sort of essence of almost like learning on the job, doing the apprenticeship model, as opposed to going off and getting your qualification as a de facto musician and then joining a band.
Yeah. So in 81, you and Fish joined Brian Jelliman, Steve Rothery and Mick Pointer and started gigging immediately?
Yeah. So we joined beginning of January. I think we were due to have a first gig at the Britannia at pretty much beginning of March. Now, I can't actually remember now why that got put back, but the first one was obviously the one at the Red Lion in Bicester, which was on the 14th of March 81. So that's about 10 weeks, something like that. And in that time, it wasn't just a case of learning the old songs. We kind of reformed the set completely. So I think the only one of the original songs that stayed as it was Time for Sale, because it was an instrumental. And initially when we would do that, it was literally almost as a filler in the set because we hadn't finished the rest of the material. So as soon as we got enough material, then that one got sort of dropped. And then you get this sort of mixture of different pieces of music. So you've got the old stuff that then gets repurposed. So the best example being Grendel, where you kind of take an old song and then add a whole new front section to it and, add on totally different lyrics, totally different melody line. But the substance of what the song is mainly is kind of there, but you've made all these additions to it. You had, I think Lady Fantasy became Madcap's Embrace. There was something else that became the sort of Skyline Drifter, a few other sort of songs. And what ended up as Forgotten Sons was originally called Alice, that then became a song called Snow Angel. So it had these different lyrics to it, but wasn't Forgotten Sons. And then the end section of it became the end section of Forgotten Sons. So that everything up until that end section is completely new material, and then that end section is part of the old stuff. So that's probably the best example of the kind of hybrid song, along with Grendel, as to adding the old and the new. But then things like Garden Party, He Knows You Know, those are all completely new songs, and I think they've got more of an edge to them. So the earlier stuff prior to that is more melodic, and I always sort of thought it was more Camel oriented than kind of Genesis influence. I'm aware a lot of people say kind of Genesis, but I think that if you listen to kind of Camel around that era, it to me feels more of a kind of Camel-esque type.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the Silmarillion tape we found, that's just 100% Camel. There's very little Genesis in it at all. So,
when does that date from, Mark?
October 78.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And Steve was a big Andy Latimer fan.
Yeah.
Huge influence on Steve. So yeah, I think that makes, as is Steve Hackett. But I think if you listen to Steve's guitar playing around that time, I think it demonstrates more the Latimer influences than the kind of Hackett ones.
Yeah. Did you find that you gelled very quickly as a band?
Yeah, I think the probably because of needs must, really. I think we certainly, Fish and I were very kind of urgent to get on with something and do something, as quick as possible, to sort of, having that whole drive of taking things forward. And I think because we all lived together, initially, I don't know if you've ever seen the inside of 64 Western Road, Aston Clinton. No. It is a tiny cottage. We're not talking, as I know Genesis was sort of, had the use of somebody's very large holiday home somewhere. This is a small Rothschild, cottage, which had God knows how many of us living in there initially. So it was very up close and personal.
I've just got visions of the young ones. That's
yeah. That would be a very or with Nail and I would be one. That's I think with Nail and I was probably Fish and I up in the Scottish borders, but yeah, it was very much those sort of vibes going on. Quite hectic. And then, of course, as we then moved out into different sort of properties, everybody was still living together. So we're in more than one property, but we were all sharing houses with each other. So that it was a very intense relationship, I think, because of that, because you are eating, drinking, sleeping, imagining, creating, doing all of that stuff, together.
Yeah. And were you surprised when Brian stepped away from the band?
He didn't step away, did he? I mean, that's he was. I've sort of said this before. I think that did I act to stop it? No. Was I actively keen and sort of pushing it for it to happen? Also, no. I think the trouble is that I'm quite an empathetic individual, so I kind of I could understand the sort of reasons behind it and all this sort of stuff, because Mark and I think Brian would say that Mark is a better keyboard player than him, but did Brian definitely bring something into the band? Absolutely. In both his writing, yes, he couldn't solo as quickly as Mark, and maybe as interestingly as Mark, but I think he brought an awful lot into it. I think Steve was quite similar. I think Steve was supportive of the change, but I think wanted to have nothing to do with the, if you like, doing the person to sort of wield the blows, so to speak. I think Fish and Mick were very, very happy to do that bit, and kind of to own it. So it's for other people to judge whether I took the coward's way out by not being involved in it, but I certainly, I'm quite empathetic in terms of the impact that I see things have on people, and so certainly not something that you sort of enjoy doing if you have to sort of get into a situation like that.
Well, some more positive things then. Just what came first? Was the Rocks on demos were before the BBC session, weren't they?
Yeah. So that's June, July, can't remember. It's either 18th to 19th June or 18th to 19th July, 1981 with Les Payne. And that was just brilliant. Just in there with Les, sort of, I think we had 2 days that we did those, went in, just trying to capture the essence of the band very much over those 2 days, because prior to that, we'd been using the original recording of what had been close that Fish had re-recorded the vocals over as the web, and Privet had got a load of tapes printed up at ITD, which is where he was working, and we were using those to sort of send out to people, but of course not really accurately reflecting where the band was at. Whereas I think those 3 songs that are on the Rocks on tape are much more reflective of where the band was then at by that point. So sort of shifted it forward.
And then the BBC session again gave you much bigger exposure, didn't it?
Yeah, and that was excellent. Maida Vale Studios and sort of Tony Wilson and doing all that sort of stuff. Again, I mean, that was I think an afternoon, if that. So it was very much live in the studio. You go, there was no overdubs. You sort of go in, you record it as you play it, and I don't think we went through them. I might have gone through them twice, if that. But I think it was very much, get the sounds, get everything, and then try and capture the essence of it. So I particularly like that one from my perspective, because obviously I'm not on any of the later recordings, but because I think it does capture that immediacy, that kind of edge, and the kind of atmosphere of the band for me, which I think. Yeah, it feels very sort of positive, because it sort of gets that essence. I missed out on the later stuff, but I was very happy with both of those.
Yeah, there's we talked with Mark and some of the other guys from the museum. There's a wealth of recorded audio from that era, isn't there?
Yes, yeah. So
don't just nod, Mark. I know you know that.
No, there is.
Go on, Mark.
Like when I was talking to Diz about the demo tape of him and Fish, I was just asking him a regular question, like, can you remember what was on it? And he was going, hang on, I'll just go check. And then he was sending messages to me as he listened to each song. My mind was blown that that existed. And then he said he had this, and then he said he had that. And I was like, any chance I could hear that? And he was like, yeah, of course. So Claude cleaned most of them up. But there's a lot of stuff out there that, well, could be and should be heard by the fans. And to be fair to Diz, he said from the start, he wants all this stuff out there. There's no point to sitting in a drawer or in a box somewhere. He wants fans to hear it, but it's getting it out there, you know.
Come on, let's name check Claude because he's desperate for a
if
super
you've
deluxe box.
Yeah, if you've listened to the podcast regularly, you'll know this is one of Claude's pet projects. So there you go, Claude. We did mention it for you again.
Back in the mists of time, I was walking across O'Connell Bridge in Dublin. It was summer of '83, and there was this guy had set up. He had a couple of big wooden cases of bootleg tapes, and I said, "Oh, I'll have a look." He had about 200 tapes in each case, but he had 4 or 5 Marillion, and they all had songs on them I'd never heard, but they were all 1980, 81 demos. I think the latest tape was Radio Clyde, which was early '82.
Yeah.
In Glasgow. And I saw Doug Irvine, and I was like, who's this guy? And Brian Jelliman, I'm like, who's this guy? They're not on script. Diz Minnitt, who's he? But hang on, he's playing Garden Party, and he's playing Charting the Single, and he knows, you know. And I was going, there's something erroneous in the timeline here. Has Diz replaced Pete? What's going on? What have I missed? You know?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I had the idea back then, like I need to know what's going on. I had every record, you know, all the tapes at the time, because there wasn't very much. So the only other outlet was getting bootlegs. And I just couldn't believe the quality of some of the songs. And I needed to find out what happened with Diz and why Diz wasn't credited on scripts. The same with Brian. And I just thought they all had an influence on the music that wasn't being accredited. So that was my initial approach to Diz, to see if he'd have a chat with me. And he was very helpful right from the start. Although it took a couple of months for him to reply to the message. But he's been so helpful. You know, he really has. He's been amazing. And for a simple fan like myself, it's incredible to have the access to him and hearing all these old stories, not just Marillion, but Pride of Passion and Benzene and everything that goes along with it, you know.
Well, we got.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of stuff out there, but like, you need people to have a will and a way to.
Yeah, well,
get them out there.
Keep trying, guys. We really want to hear it. We really do. I mean, there's one more question, which is about that night in Milton Keynes, Diz. You know, going to the gig, did you have any inkling of what was about to happen?
I think I'd had inkling for probably about a couple of days before that. There was something definitely in the air. This sort of whole sort of vibe thing had changed, and I think it was very, 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 very strange. And I kind of got to the gig, and we'd sort of set up and we'd sound checked. And then I noticed that there was a bass player there from a band. I think the band was called Stranger, which was this band that Fish had gone down and auditioned for in Northamptonshire. And I kind of saw this guy then, recognised him, and thought, you know, what on earth are you doing here? And obviously, you know, you could just be coming on to see the gig, but putting that together with the, you know, the fact my senses were sort of up.
Spider senses were tingling.
Exactly, yeah. So I went and said something to Steve and said, "Oh, why is this guy here from Stranger?" And Steve went kind of like white and sort of rushed off and disappeared off. And I thought, okay, there's something seriously amiss here. And then sort of Fish came out and started doing his sort of like, oh, you know, this is where we're at, and you're gonna have to go type thing. And the kind of bizarre thing was, I remember the bit that I always remember is like him saying, "Oh, you could punch me if you want. You could punch me." And I'm thinking, why am I going to do that? You know, as someone who's never kind of punched anybody, I'm not going to. And I think it was almost like a way of him trying to sort of, I don't know, assuage the guilt or do whatever. It was that whole bit of trying to objectify the process so that it wasn't him as someone who was a really good friend of mine doing it. It was almost this kind of other persona that was doing it. And he was trying to put that kind of emotional distance between it. But, you know, I just thought, no, I'm not going to punch you. And I just, you know, thought, okay, that's it. I'm off. Can you make sure my gear gets home? But I mean, but in that context, you know, bear in mind we're all living in the same house.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You're still living together, weren't you?
Yeah. Well, and because the house was Helen, who was my girlfriend at the time, is my wife now. It was all rented in her name, and Fish and Mark were living there, and Privet was living there. Steve wasn't. He was down in Ingram Avenue in Bedgrove in Aylesbury. But yeah, Fish, Mark, and Privet were all kind of in the house. I mean, you know, and the irony was obviously they then went off on the tour of Scotland in the van that was insured in my name with my insurance. You know, it's kind of like it's
wow.
It's kind of insult to injury. It's like no, carry on, guys, have a good time.
Yeah.
You know, but no, it's, you know, it is what it is. It's kind of like, yeah, I think that it was becoming progressively more ruthless in terms of the, you know, we need to get success at whatever costs. And if we think there's a weak link, then, you know, you're immediately out. The fact that, you know, not huge amount of time after that, yes, it is about another year later or whatever, but then that Mick is effectively, you know, ousted from the band that sort of he formed.
Yeah.
You know, you can see kind of how things kind of progressed.
How difficult was that? Because you're still in the same area as these guys, and they're starting to get success on EMI and the first album and the tour. How difficult was that to observe?
Well, the kind of it was quite a strange process because, of course, there'd always been this thing about you get credits, you get the royalties, because everything was co-written. You know, it wasn't like, you know, other people wrote stuff and I just rocked up and played bass. You know, I can kind of go through every song and say exactly how things were written, and an awful lot of stuff started. You know, he knows, you know, ironically start from the bass. Bits in sort of Garden Party start from the sort of bass rhythm and the kind of keyboard riff. Market Square Heroes actually is probably the most interesting one, because what ended up as the keyboard line was a bass line that I was playing much slower than that Mark then picked up and turned into a much faster keyboard line. And then you kind of get they added in the 3 chord, you know, the sort of chord changes for the sort of verse bit, which Mark and I wrote in the garage at 32 Victoria Street. And then, so they, you know, by the time that's going into the rehearsals and starting to build it up, then Steve's obviously adding on his guitar lines onto that, etc., etc. So you got all of this sort of stuff, and then all these you're going to get credited, you're going to get this, and then I think it's at the point that they were sort of bringing out "He Knows You Know" as the kind of initial single, and then Fish. I remember I must have gone to Fry. I think they must have been playing at Friars or something like that, and I'd kind of gone along and seen them, and I can distinctly remember him doing this bit where he sort of said, "Oh we're not crediting you because we've changed all the bass lines." You're thinking, I don't think it quite works like that. And at that point, that's the point at which you realise, okay, I have been, you know, completely shafted here.
Yeah.
And you sort of think, I need to sort of do something about this in terms of, you know, challenging what's gone on and making sure that that people get their credit.
Was that only rectified on the reissues then?
It was. We ended up. I kind of got in touch with Brian, and we were sort of, you know, in the process of going to court and doing all that sort of stuff. And of course, the difficulty that they had is they'd signed all these contracts, and all the contracts they'd signed, they'd effectively said, we have complete ownership of everything. And so that left them in this really tricky position of us going, yeah, but you don't, do you? Because, we've co-written these songs, and it's those bits where you can see the sort of credits on the songs that existed at the point that Brian and I were in the band, or that I was in the band with sort of Mark. But then you've got other people credited at later points, and I think that's why it ended up with that, because it ended up with us having to sort of settle. Got a settlement out of court, but I had to let go of all the copyright to be able to do that. So yeah.
All right. But in '82, then, off the back of that, you got together with Nigel and Brian and the other guys and joined Benzine.
Yes.
How quickly was that after leaving Marillion?
I think that was November time. So I had I kind of briefly joined a band in Northants in between time, but that kind of quickly ground into the dust sort of not long after I joined it. So it was, and it wasn't anywhere near the same sort of standard. But no, Benzine was, at that point, I think it was still called Benzine Jag until literally we sort of joined, and then we sort of proposed a name change. But that was, quite a sort of change from the kind of band I'd been in very briefly in the interim. But Nigel was the person really that sold me joining that band, because it was sort of coming in and having played with Steve, you feel very spoiled because you're kind of going and look at these sort of other bands and you're thinking, you're not very good. And then you kind of come along and I'm then playing with Nigel and going, oh, excellent. Somebody else, another really, really good guitarist that I can really relate to and kind of click with. So that, I think, was the big thing for me that drew me into Benzine.
And Nigel, well, you were aware of where Diz had come from then?
I don't think I was, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think Marillion came up on my radar until Diz joined the band. I was never a big sort of prog fan, other than Floyd, and I wasn't a early Genesis fan, although I've become much more of a Genesis fan as I've got older, particularly, and Peter Gabriel in particular. But no, Diz guy, I can remember Diz coming to the audition, and I can remember it being good fun, and I can remember there being a chemistry between him and I, which wasn't there with the guys I was already in a band with, ironically. But the whole Marillion thing, I seem to remember Diz didn't kind of lead with it. He didn't come in with a kind of, don't you know who I think I am? It was all kind of, it came out later. And I can remember us watching Top of the Pops together. I'm pretty sure the night the garden party came out, the one where Fish said, "I'm miming," that one. I can remember you and I watching that, I think at your house in Aylesbury, I think. But no, the Marillion wasn't on my radar until I met Diz, and then subsequently went to see them a few times with Diz. You got some passes, and I think we went to see them at Hammersmith, didn't we? The first headline show, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and since then I've seen them a few times, but no, the Diz didn't come in, with a Marillion t-shirt on.
So what was your sort of musical background then? What were you listening to at the time?
I grew up on Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, David Bowie, big fan of Mick Ronson, Bebop Deluxe, Bill Nelson, massive influence.
Love Bebop, sorry.
Oh, yeah. I think in the Legion solo, you can hear influences of the Crying to the Sky solo on the Sunburst Finish album, which is one of my favourite ever recorded guitar solos. Unintentional, but now I listen to it, now I can hear that. But I was definitely more the rockier side of things. Unlike, that's where Diz and I kind of didn't meet. I found that early Genesis and all that sort of stuff a bit limp. I don't know, a bit wishy-washy. I was into kind of Thin Lizzy and
Yeah, compared to Zeppelin, it's not in the same
for me
boat.
it was Zeppelin and Gary Moore as a guitar player I liked at that point, and like I said, Thin Lizzy and Whitesnake, but I stopped short of the new wave of British heavy metal thing, the whole sort of Saxon and Def Leppard and that. I didn't like that. I don't like metal or kind of rock. I like bluesy rock. That's kind of where I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are those. And Gilmore, of course, is who doesn't like Mr. Gilmore?
Craig, are you going to say what you said before Nigel came on now?
Well, we're jumping ahead of ourselves, but
yeah,
I think
we'll come back to it. But just say it now.
But I mean, I've really enjoyed Legion, the new song, and don't just put it on me, Mark, as well. Do think that the solo at the end is very Gilmore-esque. It's almost half the song. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I think it's brilliant, and it just almost has, even though it's nothing like it, it almost has like the Enter Comfortably Numb kind of feel to it. But it is, but it isn't, and it's very exciting. It's great.
I sent the recording actually to an old bass player I used to work with, which these two guys here will know who I mean when I say he's a very big, wide man. Yeah. But he's had some surgery recently, and so we were talking today, and I was telling him about this recording, and so I'd love to hear it. So I sent him it, and he wrote back, "It sounds like Comfortably Numb." It's like it sounds like Gilmore, and I've had other people say the whole track sounds like it's got elements of King Crimson and Floyd and you think, well, no shit. I mean, it was written in '82, and two of the members that wrote it used to be Marillion. It's gonna it's gonna sound like that, and we're not ashamed of it.
No, it's fantastic. And I think are we going to put a little bit of all the track on the end of this? Is that okay?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
You guys okay with that? Yeah.
We're okay with that, yeah.
We'll stick it on the end of the episode so people can hear it, but it's really good. We've jumped ahead a little bit in the time.
Jumped ahead far too far.
So I apologise.
Backpedal.
And I have to say,
several decades.
Deborah is still here, but she's been very quiet because I've not asked her anything at all yet. So I apologise, Deborah. We're coming to you shortly. Benzene becomes School of Thought in '84.
It does, yeah. So basically, I did enjoy all the stuff that we were doing in Benzene, and I think Nigel and Brian would have said the same. I think the bit that the crunch came for me because Colin was very into the idea. He was the vocalist that he should be the only person that was writing songs.
Yeah.
So it wasn't anything about the material and not enjoying the material. It was more about the fact that for me it's that bit of the creative outlet of not just arranging other people's songs but actually writing songs collaboratively. So I decided that I needed to sort of go really, and Brian agreed that he was going to go as well. And I remember talking to Nigel, and Nigel was very keen to come with us, and then I think the drummer Barry came as well. So it was, you got this bizarre thing that I didn't want to get into effectively ousting Colin from his own band. So effectively four of us left, and Colin and Joe carried on as Benzene, and we formed School of Thought. Had a very brief vocalist who joined us for a matter of about 3 or 4 weeks, but we had a fantastic cock up in as much as I forgot to cancel the audition. So Deb turned up for an audition whilst said vocalist is there, and we kind of convinced this guy to say, look, just sit on the sofa, don't say anything. Do you want to come in at this bit, Deb, and tell it from your perspective? Because
I do remember it really well. So I turned up. It was at Aston Clinton rehearsal, Scout Hut, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Probably on a Sunday afternoon or something. I'd come quite a way because I lived in London at the time. So I turned up, and the guys were all there, all set up. Looked like they'd been there for a little while, actually, because I could hear you playing something.
We lived there.
pretty convinced I could hear somebody singing as well. So I thought to myself when I turned, oh, they must have another audition. Anyway, there's a lot of scurrying about and hi, oh yes, come in. And they played me a couple of tunes, just instrumentals. Can you sing something over this? And as I was listening to it, I could see this guy who was their vocalist, who was their roadie, sort of mouthing lyrics and singing along. And I thought, there's something strange going on here. But anyway, that was that. Anyway, so yeah, the audition finished. I went home. These rang me. I think you rang me the next day, didn't you? And said, I'm really sorry, we've actually got a singer. And I went, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. And that was that. Also, I thought. So yeah, but I think you rang me a couple of months later, didn't you?
Yeah, I think it's only not even that. I think it's about
less than that.
3 or 4 weeks later. AD decided that he was going to go back and join the band that he'd left, and I I can remember that kind of cringeworthy moment at the point you said it. I think I almost might punch the edge that looked like yes, kind of type feeling, which was awful. But he right us, and we weren't right for him. And I think that he was getting to the right answer before we got to that answer. But I remember just going home from the rehearsal and phoning Deborah, probably about midnight, I think. It was some stupid o'clock, which she did answer the phone. And then convinced her to come back up again.
Is there not a funny story about that though? Because didn't you thought you'd lost my number, didn't you? And you said to Helen, "Oh, I wish I'd kept that girl's number." And Helen said, "Oh yeah, it's on the mantelpiece underneath that ornament."
Oh right,
she kept it, hadn't she?
Oh, I'd forgotten that. Yeah. That? No, I'd completely forgotten that. But it's it was very serendipitous, the whole thing really, because it's about not cancelling auditions and then not thinking of throwing something away and then it turns up again. But
it's fate, isn't it? It's fate. You were meant to be together, meant to play together.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think it's worked very well ever since. And I think that's the thing. It is that bit that when you gel with people, it works, and you get that kind of vibe. And it's very sort of transformative in terms of the way that you kind of write stuff and working together.
So between 84, sorry, Craig, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, so Deborah, what was your story before your audition? How did you get to that point? The bands and things that you were in beforehand.
Well, I was in a band. I'm from Grimsby originally.
So is my father-in-law.
No, what's his name?
Yeah, you must know him.
Oh, that's funny. Everyone knows somebody from Grimsby, honestly. Yeah, so I was in a band from when I was did my first gig when I was 15 in a pub called the Submarine. Just a little acoustic band doing covers. And then we decided that we were gonna branch out a little bit and write our own stuff. So we got a drummer in and a bass guitarist and started writing our own stuff. Originally we were called Mr. E. We recorded some stuff in a local studio and it got put on the Humber Beats Volume 1 album with a lot of other local bands. This was about 1980 or 81. And then we entered the Humberside Star Group competition, which we actually won, funnily enough. We had to do a few rounds in a heat and it was great. I loved it. I was 18 at the time or something. And then we all thought we're going to be rock stars. So we all uprooted and moved to London, changed our name to Silhouette. And we all lived in a house, aka Diz's Marillion thing going on. And it's funny actually, because about 1981, you were saying about, I remember seeing the Old Grey Whistle Test. Marillion were on the Old Grey Whistle Test. I remember we were sitting in the house, the band, watching Marillion come on. I was like, oh my God, because I used to use lots of theatrical face paint. And Fish came on and he had his face painted. I was like, oh, we've missed the boat. So that was quite a funny bit of serendipity, I guess. But yeah, we lived together in a house, but it's kind of like we've got 5 people living in a house. And the main songwriter was the bass player, Dave. He was a really good songwriter, actually. I wrote the lyrics. One of the other guys also helped with the lyrics as well. But he was also a window cleaner, because obviously he didn't have much money, and he was pretty knackered by the time he got home. So he kind of lost the impetus to write songs. So we ended up all sitting around playing mahjong instead of writing songs. We did a few gigs. We actually did support Liaison at the Ad-Lib Club in Kensington. Yeah, we did a few gigs around London and stuff, but it kind of fell apart, really. The guys were homesick and they just all went back to Grimsby, and I decided I still wanted to try and do something, you know. So started auditioning.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Aye, that's right.
Well, we're back to Pride of Passion then. Sort of 84 to 86. You went through your Spinal Tap drummer phase. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. It was a bit musical drummers that for that kind of bit. And I've sent Mark's got a really good, or hopefully a useful family tree bit where we sort of went through and mapped them all out. Obviously, you've got
yeah, I've got it.
got a copy of it. It was very Spinal Tap. You know, people lasting, you know, for a matter of sort of couple of weeks until we ended up with Grant joined us, and I think that's when the point we ended up with a kind of settled lineup, really.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Brian left towards the end. Was it 84? I think Brian went. October 84. Brian went. And we did try. I know it's interesting. I was looking through some of my old diaries, trying to get keyboard players. One of which who replied to the advert was a woman who had an upright piano, who couldn't understand why I thought it was quite keen that she had an electronic instrument, B one. That was one of the most surreal people that I had to speak to when we were auditioning keyboard players. But no, we just couldn't get a keyboard player, which is why we ended up sort of carrying on the route that we did, where we just went without a sort of keyboard player until much later, end of 86, when joined by Mr. Wilson. But prior to that, you know, it was very much Deb doing.
You can't just say Mr. Wilson. We know who you're talking about, but
David Wilson.
A young Stephen, a young fresh-faced Stephen Wilson joined the band at that point.
And what was his persona like at that point? That was his era of the long hair and?
Oh no,
was it not? Okay. No. His obsession with Prince. I mean, it's interesting because I've seen the stuff that Stephen's written about. You know, when they were obsessed with wearing these or cross-dressing and wearing hats. I'm thinking, well, there's only one person who cross-dressed and wore a hat. It was you. So, you know.
He's still obsessed with Prince now, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, no, he was he was definitely in his being obsessed with sort of Prince persona bit. I mean, the bit that, you know, I disagreed with Stephen in terms of his approach. There we go. There he is.
I'd love that.
That the musicians being almost, you know, like not quite godlike status, but having that separation between them and the audience. So they're, you know, very much keeping themselves to themselves. And I, you know, as you know, the way that we sort of set it up with Marillion was almost the polar opposite of that. It's that you are one kind of large community, and it's that kind of connection that you got between the band and the audience is what takes everything forward. You know, it's the band is not there unless the audience is there, and the audience are there because the band are there. So it's a, you know, synergistic relationship. So not really against, not really sort of up for rather the kind of idea of setting yourself apart.
And Stephen was with you until the last gig in 87, is that right?
Yeah, so Pride of Passion ended effectively on the sort of 16th of May 87. and then it metamorphosed into, or the rest of it metamorphosed into Blazing Apostles, which then sort of carried on with Stephen Wilson in that. But yeah, so that's the kind of the end of the Pride of Passion timeline and the beginning of the sort of Blazing Apostles timeline.
Who was in Blazing Apostles?
So Nigel, over to you.
Well, obviously Deborah and myself, Stephen Wilson, Grant, the drummer from Pride of Passion. I mean, it was Pride of Passion with a different bass player, essentially, right, which eventually became the late Frank Keepfer from Liaison. Sadly passed away a number of years ago now. We went through auditions, and we had one guy for a very short time. I got a couple of takes of rehearsals with him, but he didn't last. And then we had some dates booked, and I think initially, Deb will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Frank kind of helped us out initially. I think he was, I think Liaison had come to the end of its time, I think. This is all from my memory, so sorry, boys, if you're listening and I've got it wrong, but I think that's what happened, and Frank stepped up, and we did no more than maybe 3 or 4 gigs, Deb. I think we did the Wheat Sheaf, we did the Mean Fiddler, we did the Banbury Football Club, and I think that was about it.
As well.
Did we do the Marquee with him?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
It wasn't many.
And we tried to write some songs with Steve, and the whole thing, the wheels eventually came off, sort of slowly. I think the one thing I would say is, from my own personal perspective, and I think Deb would agree, but I don't want to speak for her, but I think Diz was very much the driving force behind Pride of Passion. A lot of the creativity came, and a lot of the work ethic of kicking our asses to say, come on, we're going to write some songs now. Stop doing whatever you're doing. We're going to put a drum machine on and just try and get some grooves together and write some tunes. And he was very much driving the Pride of Passion bus. And I think when he got off the bus, I think, we were, rudderless or driverless. Pick your own analogy, but it was, Steve was very, even then I think we could probably tell he wanted to be a solo artist. I think he was very much for himself, and I'm still in contact with him, and I don't think he'd mind me saying that. I think he was quite driven, and without Diz driving for the rest of us, Frank, bless him, was very much a session guy almost. I never really felt that Frank was a true member of the band. I think he came in and played bass, and right. As opposed to Pride of Passion, we were all very much, the 4 of us, Grant and Deb, Diz and I, very much, it was a band. And when Diz went, it was never quite the same, and so it didn't last very long.
Why did you leave, Diz? Why did you go in 87?
Oh,
is that the question? That's the question I shouldn't have asked, is it?
Yeah, no. It's a totally valid question to ask. I can be quite circumspect here. What happened is that we had previously been headlining the Marquee on a regular basis, and then suddenly, out of the blue, we couldn't get any gigs at the Marquee.
Or anywhere,
or in fact, or any sort of a lot of the kind of big gigs, and it was literally just sort of like, hang on, what has happened here? And I do know why. I'm not going to say that's up for the people who caused that to sort of tell that story, but it's nobody that's in this call here. That I think, unfortunately, people are called in favours and blocked us from doing that, and I think unfortunately that then put a kind of a target on my back, because it was a case of, for me, if I was in the band, then it was getting in the way of the band being able to sort of get anywhere, really. I became a liability, because that's the reason that stuff was happening. So in the full scheme of things, would we have carried on and been hugely successful? Who knows? I mean, because we unfortunately we don't have those those sliding door opportunities to go back and go, what could we have done? Where could we have ended up? But I think, taking the arc forward, which I think is an interesting sort of way of giving us that ability to look back at this as a positive retrospective. I think it's because the three of us have always remained sort of in touch, have always remained very good friends, despite any kind of brief friction around that time. And I would say it was sort of brief. I think I do remember, to his credit, the first thing that when the band finally finished, when Blazing Apostles finished, the first thing that Nigel did was sort of, phone me up and apologise that we'd ended up where we'd ended up, which I think was a very courageous and, very well regarded thing to have done, and very sort of positive. So I think because of that, ironically, I think we have always stayed very close. And so once you kind of get back to this, Mark's bit where he starts asking the questions, starts getting all the stuff going around Marillion and whatever, that makes you then revisit and go, wouldn't it be great to actually, because we've talked about it a few times, let's record some of the old stuff and sort of try and do it justice. But I think it was that extra impetus that came out of that. And again, it's back to that bit about serendipity and the opportunity to sort of do it, really, which has taken us to this bit where we did decide that, we would get back in the studio and have a go at doing something. And with our initial intention completely was just for our own interests. We didn't have any other project. Yeah, entirely a vanity project to sort of try and get decent recordings of songs that we really enjoyed writing and playing, that we didn't have a good version of to be able to listen to.
So when did you get back in the studio then?
November 23.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we cut the 4 backing tracks with Phil G, the drummer, who's an old friend of Deb and I, who used to Deb with Deb and I were in a covers band in this sort of downtime. We used to play
20 years downtime.
It was a long time, yeah. And Phil used to dep for us when our drummer wasn't available. We knew him, and he's a class act, and I knew that he could come in. And actually plays a little like Grant, who unfortunately couldn't make the recordings for ill health. Very sad that he can't no longer play. So Phil, I knew if I sent Phil a cassette of some old live recordings, I knew he'd just go, okay, make some notes, bang, do it. And in fact, we were only going to record 3 songs, and we did it so quickly, and we had so much time left that we booked for and paid for that. Could you do another one? He was like, yeah, okay. So he got my phone out and just played another song for him. And he got his pad and he's writing notes. Okay. Then he goes in the studio and we all played it, and that was it. I think we did 2 takes and it was done. He's very, very quick. And then we cut those in November 23, and then we got together, I think, in February 24 at the guy called Jem Davis, who's our current keyboard player, although he's not sort of technically, he's our keyboard consultant. Because he plays in FM, and he plays in the Jim Kirkpatrick Band and Grand Slam as well. He's got lots of fingers and lots of pies.
Yeah.
So Jim's got a fantastic home studio, which always, when you say home studio, it sounds a bit Mickey Mouse, but it's not. It's really good. And he said, "Look, you can use my place." And we thought, great. And while you're there, perhaps you could add some stuff. And I think we were all surprised by how much he did bring to the party. Actually, he really changed the direction of a few things, and got some great sounds, and we've all been very, very impressed. So I think that was February, and then did we do any more? We did a bit more recently this weekend. We finished off one track.
There's some more in July. July last year we did some more.
That's right. That's right. When Deb came down and we did the vocals and the guitar solos, guitar overdubs. That's right. So, and then we sent them off to a guy called Paul Stacey, who you may or may not have heard of. He's a phenomenal guitar player and been a very close friend of mine since 1990, 89, 90. And he's recorded, mixed, produced, the Black Crows, and more recently Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, the last few records, and played solos on some of those records. But I put him together with Stephen Wilson when Stephen was recording what was to become the To the Bone album. Steve played me some demos of what was going to be his next songs, and he was talking about where to record them and what to do, and that Steve always felt he was unproducible. And I said, well, you need to work with this guy. So anyway, Paul had his own studio then, and they recorded that whole album there. And Paul gets a great sound, and I thought he'd be really good for our stuff. And he very kindly helped us out because he's not cheap. But I called in a couple of mates' rates favors, and the first tune he did was Legions, and I think when it came back, I think for us it was night and day. The difference, what he took. If you listen to the early demo and then you listen to the final mix, it sounds like a band playing. In the same room. There's a sort of energy there that I don't know how you can pull that out with EQ and moving stuff around. It's just it's another form of genius for me. But so Paul's now mixed 3 songs, and there's a 4th that will go to him soonish, I think, once Jem's finished comping up the guitar parts and stuff. So yeah,
I mean, Mark sent us some video of you at the Marquee in '86, and it's a stunning gig. It's absolutely electric.
I mean, the energy of
plans,
it. Yeah.
Any plans to get back playing live? Is that too far away at the moment?
I think go on.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, and I'll say this and very quickly, but I think a lot of that energy came from, looking back now with hindsight, came from Diz and the way Diz worked with Grant. And I think you said earlier, you touched on the punk element of early Marillion material, and I think there was a punk element to us. I think that Diz brought. That he may not have been, I don't know, Jaco Pastorius, but he had a Chris Squire attitude of digging in.
You though.
And I think that, combined with Grant had lots of energy and always played the songs way too quickly, but that did bring something to it. And I had a kind of rock element, and then Deb was like this ball of energy all over the stage and jumping up and down. And it was, we were very energetic. I'm trying to think of a better word, but it was. I think we were a better live show than we probably were a recording band at that time. I think it's probably fair to say.
Is it plan to pull all these tracks together then into an album ultimately?
I think, and record more as well. I mean, so we got these 4 that we're pretty much finished now. That we want to record at least an album's worth of material. We've got, so there's some of the other older stuff that it's nice to get that out to a wider audience as well, to get it out there. Let's be brutally honest. The idea is not for us to make kind of millions out of this, or in fact, probably at this rate, a penny. But it's more about the enjoyment of A, recording it for ourselves, and B, getting it out there for other people to be able to appreciate if they want to listen to it. And if they don't, then that's fine.
My motivation is actually for this, us getting back together, has been ultimately to make an album. I think we started with 4 tracks, and we were thinking about putting that out as a 4-track EP, and then maybe doing some more. But and we may do that. But I would like ultimately for there to be a Pride of Passion album, because that's something we never did. But it's for my kids more than anything. It's for when I'm not here anymore, and we're all reaching that age. That at some point when they get together for somebody's birthday, somebody says, "Hey, put Dad's album on," and they enjoy it. And at the moment, there isn't anywhere where all of those old recordings are sort of collated into one thing that's Dad's record. So that's kind of my motivation. It's not, this will cost us money. We're not going to make money, and but I don't care. It's and we don't. That's why we. I don't think any of us really care if people don't like it, and it sounds.
Yeah.
Sounds. I don't mean it in a nasty way, but if I play it to somebody and they go, "It's not really my thing," I go, "Great, okay," but it's our thing. It's my thing. We you can't please everybody, and I think I think that's probably something that we did when we were younger. You try and please every genre of music lover instead of perhaps focusing on what you really were and what we were really about. And you can only do that now with sort of age and maturity. You can sort of look back.
I think
Legions is a great track to start with. It's really good. If the rest of the stuff is of that quality, I'm sure there's an audience out there for you. Absolutely.
Sorry, it isn't. So bye. Thanks for calling in.
So what were you going to say there, Deborah?
I think with the time that it's taken to record these 4 songs and get into a position that that we're happy with them, that we're kind of decided we really wanted to sort of do a pre-release EP type thing, didn't we? Maybe get them on streaming sites and stuff too, because we have got a little bit of airplay with Legions, and it'd be nice for people that have enjoyed it to be able to go and actually download it or buy it. So I'm quite keen for us to get those 4 out and then revisit some of the older stuff and then put them all together on part 2. So we've got like a 2-part album, I guess.
I think is there a way that folks can get in touch with you guys and give you some feedback, or find out more if you get this pre-release pre-order off the ground? Is there a website or a?
At the moment, we've got the very kind assistance of one Mr. Mark McCormack, who I believe may be on the call. Who's
amazing.
Busily operating the Pride of Passion Facebook group and doing a brilliant job of that at the moment.
There's a Facebook group and a Facebook page, and we're gonna work on a Wikipedia page. And I've been in touch with like Jerry Ewing and Joe Kendall, Rich Wilson at Prague, and Eclipse magazine in Germany, and I should mention Shane Carlson, Gary Foster. Lots of people have played it on their radio stations. Mark Busby, lots of people have played on the radio shows. So,
and being 7 minutes long, it's radio friendly.
It's radio well. That's okay.
Folks are going to hear it very shortly.
It gives them enough time to go and have a wee. I think that's why it's getting played.
We all need that. We all need extra time to get up.
At our age.
At our age, absolutely.
It's the prostate mix.
Well, look, guys, it's been brilliant to have you on. The music sounds fantastic. I can't wait to hear some more tracks. And thank you very much for agreeing to let us put the track on the end of this episode. So, folks, you'll be able to hear that very, very shortly. But all that remains to say is thank you very much to Deborah.
Thank you.
Nigel.
My pleasure. And thank you for your promotion, your assistance. It's much appreciated.
It's great. Thank you for coming on. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
And thanks for coming on, Diz.
Thank you.
All that remains to be said is good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Take care.
And listen to the track at the end. This episode is brilliant.
Thanks for listening to Planet Marzipan Podcast. Please like and subscribe from whichever platform you get your podcasts from. You can contact us at planetmarzipanpodcast@gmail.com and check out marillion.com, fishmusic.scot for all the good stuff.